Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our webinar, Dissecting the Food Web and Owl Pellet Investigation. So my name is Kelly Schaefer, and I will be leading this webinar tonight. And I just want to take a moment to introduce you to the Zoom platform if you haven't joined us for a webinar before. So the Zoom platform is pretty user-friendly. I do recommend that you exit full screen. So it probably went into full screen for you when I started sharing my screen. So you can exit full screen either up here with a button or by hitting the escape button on your keyboard. And then I'm going to recommend that you go down and click this chat button here. And by exiting full screen and hitting the chat button, it'll allow you to dock the window for the chat over here so that you can see what everybody is saying, and you can also see the screen that I'm sharing. Because I'm going to try and have opportunities for conversation, and I do encourage you as I'm talking to share ideas or thoughts in the chat window. One thing you're going to want to make sure that you do is change who you're sending your messages to. The default is to all panelists, but I would really love it if you could switch it to all panelists and attendees right here so that everybody can see what everybody else is saying. Otherwise, it's just going to me and Jackie, and that's no fun. All right, so let's dive in. Is everybody hearing me? I got a notice that I'm not showing up with sound. Can somebody let me know in the chat window? Okay. So if you don't have sound, one thing I'm going to ask you to do is go to the bottom of your screen and look for a microphone and make sure that you have joined computer audio. Well, that's not going to help you if you don't have sound. So I'm glad most of you can hear me. I'm going to just put a quick message in the chat window and then we'll move along. All right, sorry for the delay, everyone. Thanks for letting me know that you could hear me in the chat window. I hope Kathy can get her sound working and join us, but I'm gonna go ahead and move on because I wanna make sure that we get to cover a lot of this really great content tonight. So now that we've found the chat window, and I know you guys know where it is, let's just go ahead and take a moment to introduce ourselves. Let us know where you're from and whether or not you've dissected owl pellets with students before. Lauren from Lakeland, Florida has dissected owl pellets many times. Ellen from Bucks County, PA. Dell, our friend from Minnesota. And you have dissected owl pellets, awesome. Christy from Massachusetts, and you have not. Okay, cool. So it looks like we have a mix of folks who have done it with their students and a mix of folks who haven't. So those of you who have, please feel free to add any thoughts or advice that you have into the chat window as we progress. And thanks again so much for joining us tonight, everybody. So I'm coming to you live from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which doesn't look quite this green and fresh anymore. The leaves are already starting to change, so summer is ending. But thankfully, our mission here is year-round, and our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. And specifically, I work with the K12 Education team. My name is Kelly Schaefer again. I'm our K12 Education Specialist, and I'm joined tonight in the chat window by my colleague, Jackie, who is our Business and Communication Specialist. Jackie's a lot of fun, so please feel free to chat with her in the chat window. She's going to be flagging down questions for me so that I don't miss anything as I'm moving along. So our mission here at the K12 team is to create innovative resources and training that build science skills while inspiring young people to connect to local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. And so the curriculum that we'll be talking about tonight is our Dissecting the Food Web kit. You do not need to purchase or have this kit to get something out of this webinar. I'm going to try and put a lot of great owl and ecosystem content into it and kind of give you some ways that you can use owl pellet dissections as a lens to explore environments. So we're going to be talking about differentiating food chains from food webs, understanding why owls are important to their ecosystems, and learning how we can meet some of these NGSS and Common Core standards while teaching owl pellet content. So I'm just going to go ahead and start us off with a fun little video that will give you a sense of what this kit is like and what materials it has in it. And if you haven't dissected owl pellets with kids before, it'll give you a little bit of that fun sense of wonder.
Okay, let's start again. What I like to do is I like to put all the fur in one side.
It's like very different.
So like us, we have one job here, and
Wait, I think I really just found a job.
wow, really?
I'm getting so many tweets.
Most likely a goal or something.
It's a leg bone, and I think it's kind of snapped off at the end.
I'm thinking this is a rat skull.
I think I found a tooth. I don't know, but it's really thick.
Awesome. So what I love about that video is you can see how excited kids get once they really start digging into an owl pellet dissection. You can also see some of the materials that are included in the kit and some of the fun activities that go along with it. So we're going to be going through the lessons as a part of this kit. So we'll be looking at the 3 different lessons that accompany it and really looking at how these lessons build to this idea that I was talking about of owls being an important part of ecosystems and helps us understand how we really fit into the larger ecosystem as a whole. All right. And really, we're going to be focusing on some of these standards too. So this curriculum is standards-based, as a lot of our curricula are. So let's go ahead and jump right in and talk about a little bit why you think dissecting owl pellets are useful and why is it important to teach kids about owls. While you guys are typing that, I just wanted to give you a heads up that this webinar is recording, so you won't need to, don't worry about like scrambling to write down notes or anything. Oh, Adele, I just saw your question. Yeah, so this webinar will be available later as a recording on our YouTube channel. It helps students to understand real scientific investigative practices. Yeah, so you're digging through these pallets and you're starting to ask questions and think about what this evidence means. It reminds kids that everyone has to eat something. Yeah, so true. So it really gets kids thinking about food webs and what that means for the animals that are part of these food webs. Gets kids excited about food webs. Owls are just part of it, for sure. Oh my gosh, you have a family living on campus, a family of owls. How cool. So learning about what owls eat and how that relates to food webs. The owls are apex predators, so learning about them, it helps in discussions of energy flow in the environment. Absolutely. These are all wonderful ideas, and I think really powerful ways that owls can be awesome educational tools. So I did just want to give you a heads up that as we go through this, you're going to get to see some of the parts of the kit. And right now we do have the bone identification chart and then this skeleton diagram available as a free download from our website. And Jackie just shared that link in the chat window. So feel free to download this chart and go ahead and use it in your lessons. All right, so let's focus back in on our owls and let's think a minute about how owls fit into their habitats. So when we think about owls, we think about adaptations and some of the really cool adaptations they have that really help them suit to their habitat and to hunting. So let's take a minute in that chat window again and share some of those adaptations that we think of when we think about, for example, this great horned owl. While you're thinking and putting your answers in the chat window, the type of habitat that you might find this great horned owl in can include a lot of different things. Woods, particularly young woods, interspersed with fields and other open areas. Great horned owls really do have a broad range of habitats that they can use, and this includes deciduous and evergreen forests, swamps, deserts, tundras, tropical rainforests, well, the edges of tundras, tropical rainforests, and orchard suburbs. I've heard them in cities. You will definitely find them in cities too. They're pretty adaptable. So think about that when you're answering. All right, silent flight. Yeah, that's a great one. They're so quiet when they fly, so they don't alert their prey that they're coming. Flexible necks. Yeah, so most birds actually have kind of an S-shaped necks, even if you can't see that when you look at it. This owl in this picture doesn't appear to have much of one. Large eyes to see well. Oh, repeat the question. What kind of adaptations do owls have that help, like this great horned owl, that help them survive in their habitats? Fringe on the leading edge of wings. Yeah, absolutely. That helps make it quiet so that they can hunt at night. Yeah, so all of these adaptations, oh yeah, here we go. Sharp talons, curved pointy beak, right? So they need to be able to capture and kill their food. And the owls really rely on their talons for that. Awesome. Facial disc to help focus sound. Yeah, so you can see kind of this round shape to the face of the owl that helps focus sound, kind of like think of like a satellite dish. And so they can use that to hear. And even some owls have ears that are sort of asymmetrically placed on their head. So for instance, the left might be lower and the right might be higher. And that allows them to triangulate sound. So not just get the direction from where something's coming from, but maybe get more information on depth, sort of like depth perception for hearing. Awesome. So all of these really incredible adaptations help great horned owls and other owls be top predators in their ecosystem. And that's kind of what the first lesson of our curriculum focuses on. So how do owls fit into their ecosystem? So it covers the basic elements of food chains and the roles that these different elements play. Starts to look at trophic levels, which can be a really complex topic, but in the context of this, I think it works really well for students and the students can grasp it really well. And to start to talk about how energy flows through ecosystems. And what's really cool about this is it gives us the opportunity to take a step back and look about what happens when there's a disruption to an ecosystem, to a food web, and how that kind of ripples through. So let's really focus in on the foundation of this, which is a food chain. And the term food chain refers to a natural system by which energy is transmitted from one organism along to another. And we think of these systems, these food chains, as really having four main elements. And you can see those here in this picture. The first being the sun, which is our primary source of energy. Next in line comes producers, and producers take the energy from the sun, convert that light energy into chemical energy, which is then stored as carbohydrates or sugars. So things that do this are going to be your plants, algae, cyanobacteria. Those are all great examples. And then from there we move into consumers. And there can be several levels of consumers within an ecosystem, but these are all organisms that eat or consume other organisms for energy. So that can mean that some of these producers are going to be herbivores that eat only plants. You're going to have carnivores that eat only meat, and then of course you're going to have some that do a little bit of both, your omnivores. And then things like parasites and scavengers are also going to fall into this group of consumers. And then we move into the decomposers, and these are a sometimes overlooked but really super important part of our food chains. So these are going to be your fungi and your bacteria that break down waste and dead animals and dead plants, and they convert all of that back into nitrogen and carbon and nutrients that can be recycled back into the ecosystem. So this is how our soil gets built back up. This is how nutrients re-enter the cycle of life and can then be taken up in the roots of producers for their nutrients as they're converting the sun into energy. So decomposers have a really incredibly important role to play in ecosystems. And so that's really kind of a simplification of what we're looking at. So this is just one system in a larger picture. So when we start to combine different food chains, we start to see that there's a ton of relationships between them, and interconnectedness, and we realized that what we actually have in practice is a food web. And food webs really show how plants and animals are connected and illustrate a much more complex idea of the flow of energy through an ecosystem. So species are interconnected in these food webs, and if one is removed, it can affect the entire ecosystem. So what we like to do to really demonstrate the complexity of this food web is we take students through an activity that we like to call the food web tangle, and you can see that pictured here on the right. So we use string to represent how energy flows among different organisms, and each student gets assigned an animal or a plant, so a producer or consumer, decomposer. They get assigned some part of the food web, an organism to represent. And then they get to draw the connections between themselves by passing the string. So say a plant, or if we use our seeds as an example, the seeds would be connected by string to the jumping mouse and to the goldfinch, and the jumping mouse onto the snake or the barn owl or the Cooper's hawk. And from the barn owl, the snake, and the Cooper's hawk onto the decomposers, the fungus. So you get this really complex web that you can look at and you can see physically represented. And then this allows you to make manipulations that the students can then feel. So you can have the mouse, for example. Something happens to the mice. Let's say somebody puts out rat poison and the mice die. So you can have the mouse sit down where they are, and then everybody affected by what happens to the mouse is going to feel a tug on their string. So you can start to really dig into these concepts of something happens to one, it affects the whole of the food web. So it's a really great way to demonstrate that in a physical manner to your students. And from this, it really allows you to dive into the discussion of some more difficult questions. So Adele's asking question, if the kids pass string from person to person one at a time, like the sun passing string to the leaves, berries, etc. Yeah, so you're wondering about how these things can get set up, and that's a great question. We've had educators do it in many ways. I really like to kind of reinforce the food chain aspect by doing what you're suggesting for at least one. So the string gets passed from the sun to a producer, to a consumer, to, if there's a logical secondary consumer, to the decomposer. So you see one food chain get made. And then you can repeat that until you have a food web and then start putting in interconnectedness. And so we've had people do it that way. We've also had maybe one person will step forward, the American goldfinch, and they'll say, well, what do you think you're connected through? And they kind of do it an animal by animal basis. I'm a fan of the food chain basis, if that helps. Okay, so let's dive into this more complex look at trophic levels. So you'll notice these are all the same animals from our food web diagram, but we're seeing them put into these different levels. So this allows us to kind of look at and think about what is the difference between a primary, secondary, and tertiary consumer, and how does energy pass along these different levels, and more importantly, how do these levels interact with each other on an ecosystem level? So what I want to do right now is give you a scenario, and I want you to share what you think about it and how it will impact each trophic level. So think about it as it moves through the trophic levels. So this scenario is about a town that has a lot of large-scale gardens and flower plantings, and they're really, really proud of these plantings. But they're having issues with insects and insect damage, and they're not cool with it. They want their plantings to be pristine. So they spray an insecticide over their flowers. So my question for you is, how would the spraying of this insecticide impact primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers? So go ahead and share your thoughts on that scenario in the chat window. I'll take a moment to just repeat the basic scenario. So we're looking at an area where insecticides have been sprayed over flowers and plants, and how is that going to affect the primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers? So Adele's saying that the primary consumers might die, so something like our caterpillars, or they might just have insecticide in them. Yeah, and I would say that would be pretty true for our primary consumers. Lisa's saying that the end result is going to be that less energy is available on all levels. Kathy's saying fewer insects, so there will be less energy for the insectivores and less for the next trophic level, and so on. And Adele's bringing up a great point. The insects, or the primary consumers that have insecticide in them, if they're eaten by secondary consumers, now secondary consumers have that insecticide in them. Kirsty's echoing that thought. And then she's even going further, saying that the tertiary consumers might eat the poisoned secondary consumers, thus we see poison traveling through them all. Yeah. These are all great. Lauren's adding, again, you're going to see these effects all the way up. And the pesticides get concentrated. Yeah, so there's an effect called bioaccumulation that you will see in these sorts of scenarios. So you have an insect with insecticide in it gets eaten by secondary consumers. And enough of those get eaten because they eat multiple insects that now the secondary consumer actually has a higher concentration of the insecticide in it than the primary consumers did. And then if all of the prey that the tertiary consumers are eating are exposed to these toxins as well, then the tertiary consumers have a higher concentration even than all the other levels. So this is called bioaccumulation or biomagnification. And this, yes, Kathy brings it up, exactly. This is how DDT, which is was an insecticide that was used in the US for quite a while, really began to affect our bald eagles and our peregrine falcons. Our top level predators were the ones seeing some really dire consequences because of the accumulation of these toxins within trophic levels. So the thinning of eggshells. Oh, Kathy, we just got a heads up that your comments aren't showing to the whole group. So if you could take a moment to switch your answers from going to all panelists to going to all panelists and attendees, that would be awesome. So sorry, I interrupted myself. Tertiary consumers, our peregrine falcons, our bald eagles had high concentrations of DDT in them, which resulted in their eggshells being really thin and resulted in them cracking under the weight of their incubating parents. Like, that would be so devastating. And it was not just on an individual family level devastating, it was on a species level devastating. And then Ellen's saying that even when you get to the next level, when you get to these tertiary consumers being so affected, and in this example of DDT, even numbers dropping drastically, that's going to affect all the levels below it because you don't have this predator control above it. That's a great point, Ellen. So this allows us to really see how complicated and interwoven these different levels of these different trophic levels are, these food webs are, and how interconnected everything really is. So now that we have that idea in our heads, in the curriculum, we move on to lesson 2, where we start digging into our owl pellets. And this is where we put the owl's position in the food web into perspective. And we focus on how owls are top predators, and that we can study what they eat through their pellets. And we can talk about how scientists use pellets to learn about owls' health, their behavior patterns, population numbers, prey. All of this information really helps us learn about the ecosystems that owls live in. And so some of the things that students will do in here, they're going to dissect their pellets. They're going to learn about some of the importance of accurately recording their observations. They're going to study and identify the parts that they find using dichotomous keys and that free bone chart that you can download, and have the opportunity to even reconstruct a skeleton based on the parts that they find. So let's take a minute to talk a little bit about how owl pellets are formed. It's kind of an interesting process. So owls really often, they swallow their prey whole, and that's because their beaks are not terribly strong, not as strong as other raptors. So they don't really have the ability to rip it into smaller pieces. So they swallow it whole, which means the skeleton doesn't get broken up. And the owl's stomach juices happen to be pretty weak. So that means that owls can really only digest the soft parts of their prey. So the things like bones, fur, feathers, teeth, and what's really cool is even exoskeletons of insects get left behind. So they're not getting digested by the weak stomach acid. And so these are the pieces and parts that make up the owl pellets that our owls regurgitate. So the owl's prey goes into the stomach. The digestive juices begin to dissolve the soft parts, the meat and other digestible materials, and then this allows them to continue on to the intestines. Meanwhile, the stuff that isn't digestible, all of that fur, feather, bones, exoskeletons, remains in the stomach, and muscle action in the stomach actually compacts it into a tight pellet. But in order for that pellet to get back out of the owl, it has to make the journey back up the esophagus, so it needs to get coated in a slippery kind of mucus covering that allows it to travel back out. And this takes 6-ish hours for an owl to produce and regurgitate a pellet after it eats. And so the pellets in our kit are actually from wild barn owls. You can see barn owl pictured in this lovely diagram. And they are extra large because barn owls are a pretty decent size. But they are also from the wild. And this is important because this is going to give you a cool diversity of prey to look at. So if you get owl pellets on your own, I would recommend looking for wild pellets because this is going to give you the opportunity to see birds and voles and shrews and other things, and insects. We had somebody dissect 6 of our pellets recently, and there were a ton of mandibles from stag beetles in it, and it was super, super cool. Versus owls that are in captivity where they usually get fed the same thing over and over again. So I am going to take a minute to share with y'all a short video of what it looks like when an owl regurgitates a pellet. It is not, there's no sound, it's not particularly disturbing, but if you're feeling extra squeamish, you might want to look away for a moment. I promise I will let you know when it's over. So let me just share a different screen here. Here we go. We're starting. Oh gosh. Sorry, YouTube ad. So this is a barred owl in Ottawa, Canada. And there we go. That's all it was. Looks pretty easy peasy. I guess if you're doing that, 2 times a day, you get pretty used to it. All right. Thanks for going on that journey for me. I think half the fun for kids when they do owl pellets is that there's a little bit of an ick factor. And it's really fun watching them overcome that ick factor. And so I'm seeing we had a question that I missed about owls and their stomachs. They do have 2 chambers to their stomachs, yeah. And so the pellet gets made in, I want to say the first chamber, but I could actually be wrong. I can try and look that up at the end. So it's great that you asked that question, because that's important for our students to understand before they dissect an owl pellet. How is it formed? So within our curriculum kit, you will find student fact sheets, because the process is complicated and we want them to have an understanding of how it works. And so probably if I had read this sheet before doing this tonight, I wouldn't be able to tell you which chamber of the stomach. And so we view this as kind of the starting point for students before they dissect an owl pellet, so they know what they're dissecting. So of course, next comes the actual super fun part of dissecting the owl pellet. Now you'll notice in this picture, our students are not wearing gloves. That's because our owl pellets are sterilized using high heat. So they're safe to touch. You may have a few students though who don't feel comfortable doing that, so I would recommend having some gloves on hand if you have access to them. And you'll often see those students start with the gloves and then abandon them because everybody else is without gloves, and it's a little easier to manipulate everything without the gloves. But it's nice to have them on hand if you have access to them, and just help students who are uncomfortable feel more comfortable. So when we start our owl pellet dissection, we really focus on observational skills. So this means having students measure the size and shape of their owl pellet, look at the coloration, look at the texture, even draw a 2-scale model of their pellet. And so they get really familiar with it and they don't just dive in. But from there, it's time to dig in and see what they can find within their pellet. And this can be kind of a patient process of carefully picking out bones. Students are likely to find a variety of skulls and bones within the pellet. Sometimes you get more than 1 skull in a pellet, and sometimes you get the pieces and parts from different species of animals. So we provide a series of handouts to really guide your learner through the identification process. And this is one I want to flag you again to go ahead and download that free bone chart, because I think it gives you a really good idea of the quality materials in the kit. Also, it's just great to use. It has a lot of different species on it. And Jackie did just put that link in the chat window for y'all again. All right, so one part of the kit that I think is really, really cool is that we actually have a dichotomous key to help students identify what they're looking at. And I've put some screenshots here of the materials so you can see what that looks like. And I'd actually really like for us to work through a part of this dichotomous key. So we're going to be looking at this skull that I have pictured on the left. I have some informational pictures there as well to help you answer this. So we're going to go through the dichotomous key. Go ahead and throw your answers into the chat window as we go through it. So number 1, A, skull does not have teeth or holes for teeth? Or B, skull has teeth. So what are you seeing looking at this skull? A, does not have teeth or holes for teeth, or B, has teeth. Looks like people are seeing teeth. Yep, letter B, go to number 2. All right, let's do it. So if it hadn't had teeth, then we would pretty definitively have a bird. So we'll move on to number 2. A, skull does not have a diastema or a gap between the front and cheek teeth. Or B, skull has the diastema. And for reference, there's this image here of a skull with a diastema. So do you think you're seeing a diastema, which would be B, or is there no diastema, A? It has diastema, yes, B. B, diastema. All right, looks like we're pretty well in agreement that skull has a diastema, so we're going to go to number 4. And this is where you might not really be able to see this very well in the image, but we have some examples of teeth here, so you can see lobed and angled. And I'll just draw your attention to this view of the teeth and this view of the teeth. I'm not seeing these multiple kind of ridges in one tooth. What I'm seeing is just like one straight projection. And so to me, that really looks like the angled. And I know it's hard to see, but I can confirm from having manipulated the skull that yes, these are angled teeth, which would get us to the bowl. So using this dichotomous key, your students can identify what they found and get some really good practice with dichotomous keys, which you will find if they move into the biological sciences and they're like naturalists in trying to identify plants or insects. Dichotomous keys are where they might live for a while. So it's great to have some experience with that. Cool. So from there, the students can, once they've identified their animal, they can actually try and reconstruct it using this prey skeleton sheet that comes with the kit. And they can do that by using the bone chart, which helps them identify what part of the body that they're looking at. One of the great things is, assuming that they have bones from the same kind of prey, if they've identified the skull, if they have one, they can kind of start there. So we would start with our vole, and if the bone doesn't match that, we could go from something else. So it gives you a place to focus in on and see how much of that skeleton drawing students can recreate. And sometimes you get lucky and you get quite a bit of what you're looking for. I don't think I've ever actually found the toe bones, just because they're so tiny and it's hard to tell them apart from other things. But you know, if you do find them in a dissection, take a picture and add us on social media because I want to see it. All right, so that moves us into the third lesson, which is all about predicting prey. So it looks at, really compares, contrasts, and analyzes these 3 owl species that you see represented in these drawings. So we're looking at the barn owl, the great horned owl, and the eastern screech owl. And different owls eat different preys based on their preferred habitat, what time they're active, their size, what the season is, and what the prey availability in its particular area is. So due to the kind of differences that we find in these owls, we can do some fun, unique analyses and predictions. And so this lesson really guides students through thinking about these different things. And I want us to take a stab at this as well. So here are those 3 owls I mentioned: the eastern screech owl, the smallest, coming in at between 6 and almost, well, 6 and over 9.5 inches. Barn owl, 12.5 to about 15.5. Great horned owl, roughly 18 to 24 and change. So we've got 3 different size classes of prey, different feather plumages. So I want to pop up a poll now, and it's going to have, I want to say, 8 questions in it. And then just go ahead and take a moment to answer the poll, and use these images and what you notice about the owls to help you answer it. I'm trying to get, there it is. All right, so you should see the poll pop up in the center of your screen. Go ahead and drag it off to the side if you want to look at your different owl pictures. Go through the questions, select an answer, and then at the end you'll hit, I think it is submit poll. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do this, and then we'll look at the results together. Oh, I see some answers rolling in. Awesome. So about half of our folks have submitted. If you're done, make sure that you hit that submit button at the bottom. Going to give you about another 30 seconds to finish up. Ten-second warning. All right, make sure you hit that submit button. I'm about to end the poll. All right, so I just shared the results. You should be able to see them on your screen. So let's just take a minute to go through them. I'm a powerful predator that can catch large prey. My talons are so big, you better keep your cats indoors. And 100% of people said the great horned owl. Yeah, so great way to use size as a clue. And we also had that story about a cat nearly getting got earlier in the chat window. So yes, the great horned owl. I'm the most widely distributed species of owl. I live on every continent except Antarctica. We had a bit of a split here, but yes, that is the barn owl. They are very widely distributed across the world. Number 3, crows gather from near and far to yell at me for hours. The crows have a good reason for this. I'm their most dangerous predator. Wow, 100% on this one. I am impressed. Yes, it is the great horned owl. So the great horned owl is a pretty notorious predator for crows. Sometimes they will just like take the heads of the prey, of the crows, and crows go crazy when they see a great horned owl. So if you ever hear crows just absolutely losing their minds, calling, 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 look for them, look at where they're looking, look if they're dive bombing something, because they might just show you where a great horned owl is hiding. All right, let's move on. Oh, Ellen's mentioning that blue jays as well. Yeah, blue jays are another great bird that if you hear them upset about something, you should check it out because it's probably a bird of prey. All right, number 4, even though I eat European starlings, a starling might take over my nest and lay its own eggs. So we had a bit of a split here as well, but the answer is eastern screech owl. And that's because they're tiny. And this is kind of interesting to me. It's difficult for me sometimes to compare birds that I don't often see next to each other size-wise. In my head, the screech owl is just a little bit bigger than a starling, but they're roughly the same size because birds are very picky about the nest holes that they use and the size of those nest holes. Anyway, number 5, I strictly hunt at night compared to my fellow owls who also hunt at dusk, dawn, and sometimes even during the day. Yeah, so it looks like I messed up the poll a little bit on the back end here. So the actual correct answer is the barn owl, and you can kind of see that if you look at these pictures. The barn owl's eye is basically all pupil. They are essentially all nighttime. All right, number 6. I come in 2 color morphs, gray and red. And yep, that's the eastern screech owl. I think I've mostly seen red. Has anybody out there seen the gray? I'm wondering if there's habitat or geographical differences. I'm sure there's a paper out there somewhere that would tell me the answer. Number 7, my ability to locate prey by sound alone is the best of any animal that has ever been tested. Yes, that is the barn owl. And to me, that makes a lot of sense when we were just talking about barn owls being the ones that hunt strictly at night. Their sense of hearing is so, so important to them. And then 8, I am the coolest owl of them all. Oh, and the great horned owl edges out and wins that one. That's fun. Anybody have a favorite owl that wasn't included in the poll? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the results. Thanks for playing along on our owl trivia. Lauren's a fan of the barred owls, yeah. Why is the great horned owl the coolest? That's just an opinion that I was trying to force you to choose, which is the coolest thing because I wouldn't want to choose. Yeah, they are also cool. Oh, a couple of people are bringing up burrowing owls. Yeah, they're pretty spectacular too. All right, here we go. So we provide within the kit species fact sheets for these 3 owls and then have students kind of read those over and fill in a Venn diagram comparing and contrasting the species and looking for their similarities and differences. So you can kind of get a sense for what the sheets look like there with their range maps. They talk about nesting habits, food, habitat and range, all of that good stuff. And I want to take the last few minutes of our webinar tonight just to share some extra resources with you. So that was kind of the rundown of our kit that we offer. But again, if you don't have access to funds to purchase the kit, there are ways that you can provide this experience to your students and really rich experiences around owl pellets. And so a book that I recommend for younger students is White Owl, Barn Owl. And we do have a book guide around this book. So it has some activities that you could do with students after reading the book. And Jackie just shared a link to that in the chat window. And so it kind of covers all of these different topics related to owls. specifically barn owls. Another awesome resource, if you are interested in making a unit out of it and seeing if you can attract owls to your area, you're going to want to check out Nestwatch, nestwatch.org, which is a citizen science project. What's awesome about Nestwatch is that it provides you with really well-designed plans for building nest boxes for all sorts of different species. Here you can see the eastern screech owl red morph pictured, and you can just kind of sort of see that we put in the northeast region, and it will tell us whether or not the species is in decline, and then allow us to download construction plans and even see the difficulty level of the plans. So all of these plans are going to be the best designed for the health of your birds. They've got air ventilation, they've got drainage holes, they've got the right sized entrance hole. You might feel the urge to put in a perch in front of the hole, but we really recommend that you don't, and they aren't included in these plans because that ends up actually just providing a place for predators to sit and stick their head in. So the birds going in and out of there don't need it, so resist the urge. But you can find plans like this not just for owls, but any species as a free download. And then what's really great is Nestwatch is a citizen science project, so you can monitor these nests if you have access to the nest box and submit that data to the Nestwatch program, and then it becomes part of our larger scientific understanding of how these species are doing across the country. So there's lots of materials available for you on nestwatch.org. Definitely check it out, see if it's something you'd like to do with your students. There is a free downloadable curriculum for 5th through 8th grade available on our website for this as well. And then one last thing I want to draw your attention to is our Bird Sleuth Investigator magazine. It is a student publication. It's all student writing, artwork, and science investigation. So if you do something cool around owls, you do some artworks, you do creative writing around it, maybe you do an investigation, you can definitely submit that to our magazine and be considered for publication. And Jackie just shared the link to that in the chat window for you all. And again, don't forget the free bone chart. Definitely download it, use it, let us know how you like it. Any questions? Hi, Adele. Yeah, the artwork can absolutely be a scam. There are guidelines on our website for what we're looking for. A scan would actually be ideal versus like a digital photo. Thoughts about students dissecting owl pellets in pairs versus individually? I think pairs is fine. Individually is great if you have those resources. If you don't, pairs work really well, especially if you have some supplemental material like bone charts, like dichotomous keys that one student can be working on while the other is pulling things out of the pellet. And what's kind of neat about it is it gives you somebody to share your excitement with, right? Like if you find a leg bone, but everybody else is in a pellet and they find a leg bone too, it's more exciting sometimes when you actually have somebody be like, oh my gosh, look what we found. So yeah, I think pairs work better in a lot of cases. And Jackie's reminding me that our kit is set up for pairs. Pairs versus Paris. Dissecting pellets as pairs in Paris would be preferable to most other things. All right, if y'all have other questions, I'm sticking around. Feel free to keep typing questions in the chat window, but I do want to draw your attention to this slide here, which has our website and our email. So we do offer completion letters worth 1 contact hour through our webinars. All you need to do is email us and we'll send you that completion letter. So email us at k12lab@cornell.edu. We'll send you that letter if you were here at the live webinar. But more exciting, we have some actual credit options. So for those of you who need CEUs, if you need continuing education credits more than just a completion letter, we have options for that. So there are 3 different options. One would be attend all 10 webinars and submit to us a review of the webinar. And that's worth 10 contact hours, which is 1 CEU. The other option is watch 5 of our monthly series of webinars and submit those reviews and an implementation plan. And the final option is 1 webinar, the reviews, an implementation plan, and a report on how implementing what you learned worked. And Jackie shared all of that in a link in the chat window, so you can read that at your leisure if you want a more clear explanation than what I gave. Again, you can always email us with questions. We love to hear from you. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording here, and I'm going to mute myself for a moment, but please feel free to continue to ask questions. Jackie and I are going to hang around for a few more minutes and answer any questions that you have.